4 months earlier. It all originated in a pristine clinic chamber where a fading woman rendered the paramount choice of her existence, planting the kernels of equity with a mother's concluding sigh. The afternoon light filters through the clinic panes like amber threads grasping for what is already ebbing. Madame Elise Dupont's delicate hands, once deft enough to cultivate a vineyard empire, now quiver as they clasp her daughter's fingers. The apparatuses hum their artificial pulse while Sophie bends nearer, eager to seize every syllable tumbling from her mother's parched lips. "My girl," the elder murmurs, her tones scarcely discernible over the whir of vital sustenance. "There are documents in my bureau, the secured compartment." Her gaze blazes with a fervor piercing the palliative fog, and Sophie affirms with a nod, not grasping why her mother's clasp tightens with such fervent vigor. What records could surpass this ultimate farewell? A month prior, the recollection unreels like a bitter film. Madame Elise Dupont poised elegantly at Sophie's conservatory commencement in Paris, her graceful silhouette eclipsing the sun as she draws her daughter into an embrace that seems eternal. The admiration beaming from every line on her visage elevates the occasion to sanctity, a memory destined to torment Sophie in the shadows forthcoming. "All I've nurtured," her mother proclaimed to all within hearing. "Every vine in that chateau, every trade pact, every asset, it's all for this girl here." The fellow guardians offered courteous grins, but Madame Dupont wasn't enacting for them. She was vowing to the cosmos itself. Now, as Sophie observes her mother's bosom heave with mounting strain, she ponders if the cosmos heeded. The respirator veils with each strained inhalation, forming a divide between mother and daughter that mirrors all that is vanishing. Sophie's thoughts whirl through 2 decades of remembrances. Lullabies sung in that melodic accent, vineyard strolls where quiet conveyed more than speech, enterprise teachings over café au lait on integrity and fortitude. Madame Elise Dupont had been beyond a parent. She'd been a beacon amid life's tempests. "Promise me," the ailing woman rasps, her eyes fixing on Sophie's with an ardor that chills the young woman's marrow. "Promise you'll recall what I said about the documents." The cardiac monitor's cadence grows irregular, and Sophie senses her universe tipping. What vow is she tendering? What records hold such precedence that they eclipse mortality? The mortician's rehearsed empathy cannot blunt the harsh verity that transpires in the chateau's opulent salon. For days on, Victor descends from his quarters like a performer claiming the limelight, his somber suit impeccably tailored, his lamentations impeccably timed. He receives condolences with the poise of a bereaved spouse. Yet Sophie discerns something that knots her gut. The manner his gaze flits to the family notary during mentions of the testament perusal, the subtle scheming behind his mournful veneer. The procession of mourners flows like a stream of dark attire and hushed consolations, but Sophie feels submerged in full view. Her mother's associates clasp her arm and speak of heritages, but their utterances ring vacant, like resonances in a deserted chapel. Unbeknownst to her, the genuine spectacle is yet to commence. The testament recitation occurs in Madame Elise Dupont's study, encircled by oak shelves and bound ledgers that forged a vinicultural dominion. Victor perches stiffly in his seat, his polished shoes tapping against the parquet with ill-concealed eagerness. The notary's timbre intones the juridical jargon, but Sophie scarcely concentrates. Sorrow has enveloped her intellect like dense mist. "To my cherished husband Victor," the notary declares, "I bequeath the chateau and all its appurtenances." Sophie witnesses Victor's posture ease with evident respite. "To my daughter Sophie I bequeath..." Here, the notary halts, rearranging folios with expert hesitance. "The contents of my private vault and any parchments therein." Sophie blinks in bewilderment as Victor's grin spreads like ink in water. "A vault? A vault? But ere she can inquire, Victor is already rising, already advancing, already asserting his bequest with the efficacy of a victorious legion. The expulsion arrives cloaked as paternal solicitude, conveyed with sobs that appear authentic until one scrutinizes Victor's eyes. "Sophie, my dear," he intones, his voice oozing artificial tenderness. "This estate is overly expansive for us too, and frankly, I think your mother would desire you to carve your own course." The phrases strike like corporeal assaults, each meticulously selected to appear rational while wrenching the blade. Sophie regards the man who'd nurtured her for 4 years, hunting for any vestige of the stepfather who'd once arranged her piano recitals and aided with études. "I've already consulted a fine gentleman about leasing your suite," he proceeds, and Sophie comprehends this isn't discourse, it's an annihilation. The girl who'd once roamed every nook of this chateau now has an hour to compress her life into 3 duffels. Poised in the courtyard with her possessions strewn at her feet, Sophie pivots once more to behold Victor observing from the pane. His countenance inscrutable behind the velvet. The chateau, her mother's domain, her youthful haven, abruptly resembles a bastion with the portcullis raised. As she traverses the lengthy path, lugging her bags, Sophie murmurs an invocation to her mother's essence. "I don't fathom what you implied about those documents, ma'am. But I vow I'll decipher it." The gates groan shut behind her with the irrevocability of a sepulchre seal. And Sophie Dupont, erstwhile successor to a realm, morphs into another vagrant young woman treading the byways with no refuge. Yet in her mother's secured compartment, fate bides serenely for its cue to retaliate. The transmutation initiates the instant the entrance seals behind Sophie's receding silhouette. Victor discards his grieving garb like a serpent molting, unveiling the entity concealed under strata of feigned mourning and fabricated woe. He stands bare in the master suite, Madame Elise Dupont's suite, and extends his limbs skyward like a captive at last emancipated. At last, he exhales to his image in the antique looking-glass. At last, all is mine. His digits trace opulent jewel cases, couture valises, and cashmere scarves now utterly his. The widower's guise discarded, what surfaces is more harrowing than bereavement, unadulterated cupidity, donning a mortal mask. But Victor remains oblivious that his jubilation is hasty, that within this very abode, a juridical explosive lurks to shatter his illusion. The call to his brother crackles with spiteful exultation as Victor prowls the chateau like a beast staking its domain. "You should have witnessed her expression when I commanded her departure," he chortles, his timbre reverberating through chambers still scented with Madame Elise Dupont's lavender essence. "For years I feigned affection for that girl. 4 years of recitals and études, all for this juncture." He glides his nails along the marble balustrade costing more than most abodes, sensing the sleek stone now solely his. "The foolish woman thought I wed her for passion," he persists, his mirth keen as a stiletto. "I wed her for precisely this, every flagstone, every chandelier, every vineyard share." His brother's accolades hum, but Victor scarcely attends. He's engrossed in inventorying his fresh realm, inebriated by the aroma of total dominion. What he overlooks is that dominion demands more than occupancy. It demands validity, which he's soon to learn he never possessed. The cleansing commences at daybreak the following morn, a methodical obliteration of Sophie's trace unfolding with martial efficacy. Victor assaults the family portraits foremost, excising Sophie's beaming visage from frames and consigning shards to the granite hearth. Flames devour depictions of fêtes d'anniversaire, commencements, and provençal sojourns, 4 years of contrived kin memories reduced to cinders. "Every vestige," he intones mantra-like. "Every solitary vestige of that girl must vanish. Her juvenile sketches, meticulously safeguarded by her mother in ornate frames, fuel the blaze. Next, the artistry of a 7-year-old Sophie, stick figures of her kin beneath a radiant Provençal sun, curls and chars as Victor observes with gratification. He uncovers her milk teeth, preserved in a petite satin coffer by Madame Elise Dupont's bedside, and scatters them in the orchard like trifling stones. Yet no matter his destruction, he cannot incinerate the verity concealed in his late wife's secured compartment. The renovation mania morphs the chateau into Victor's private altar to self, effacing decades of matriarchal aura with merciless proficiency. Madame Elise Dupont's cherished velvet settee, where she recited Provençal folklore to young Sophie, is carted off by charity laborers unwitting they're hauling fragments of a mother's devotion. Her perfume vials, her gardening shears, her assemblage of aged vintages, all that rendered this domicile a hearth rather than mere edifice, evaporates like vapor. Victor substitutes kin likenesses with minimalist sculptures signifying naught, exchanges warm terracotta hues for stark grays and chromes mirroring his essence like a speculum. Finally, some elegance here, he declares to the vacant spaces, but his voice resounds oddly in areas no longer acknowledging him. He's fashioned a splendid mausoleum, ideal for exhibiting affluence but abysmal for nurturing existence. What Victor fails to grasp is that dwellings recollect their authentic proprietors, and this one is priming to repudiate him like an organism expelling a pathogen. The extravagance surge ensuing would awe Renaissance patrons with its brazen prodigality. Victor assaults the coffers with the voracity of one famished for eras, channeling funds to acquisition ledgers with a tap. Haute couture gowns cram wardrobes once housing Madame Elise Dupont's modest yet refined frocks. Lavish gems amass on his vanity like a WRM's hoard, each item another emblem of his conquest over the kin that never wholly embraced him. He employs a fitness instructor, a culinarian, a chambermaid, assembling a cadre of outsiders to populate the chateau that grows eerier despite novel inhabitants. "I merit this," he affirms to his reflection while donning a cufflink costing more than most wages. "I tolerated that woman and her whelp for 4 years." But meriting and possessing diverge, and Victor is destined to discern that the cosmos maintains meticulous ledgers on equity. The fates inaugurate a month post-interment. A cavalcade of Victor's novel acquaintances arriving in luxury vehicles and departing with precious flasks from Madame Elise Dupont's cellar trove. They salute Victor's fresh existence while treading chambers where Sophie once sketched vines with chalk, savoring victuals on porcelain witnessing 4 years of kin repasts. Victor revels in their adulation like a bloom orienting to the soleil, at last attaining the societal stature he deems eternally his due. To Victor, they acclaim elevating goblets brimming with vintage reserved by the deceased for Sophie's nuptials, the most deserving widower we know. The glee resounds through the chateau like jackals encircling carrion, and Victor feels more vital than in Anims. But festivity breeds negligence, and in his euphoria of triumph, Victor has overlooked thievery's cardinal tenet: always scout for observers. The isolation assails in the wee hours when revelers have dispersed and staff retreated to their existences. Victor wanders his immaculate chateau, his steps echoing on flagstones sounding overly resonant in the hush. Every chamber is flawless, every plane pristine, yet something vital lacks: the warmth of being authentically desired over transiently utilitarian. He lingers in the study where Madame Elise Dupont once toiled late forging the empire he now commands, and for the initial instant since her demise, he senses a glimmer that might be remorse. "You reaped what you sowed, old hag," he mutters to her vacant throne, but the phrases ring empty even to him. What Victor ignores is that Madame Dupont pierced his charade years prior, and her authentic testament, her veritable one, awaits in the secured compartment he's never deigned to probe. The matriarch's ultimate chortle approaches, resonating through every chamber of the abode he fancies his. The hostel for the destitute's glaring bulbs drone like irate hornets overhead as Sophie gazes at ceiling panels, tallying blemishes over lamps. Her frame throbs from reclining on a pallet too narrow for her stature, enveloped by the respirations and snorts of 24 other women who've strayed in the world. The odor of commercial sanitizer can't wholly veil the undercurrents of despair and shattered aspirations permeating this locale. Her mother's burial gown dangles on a proximate peg, the sole memento of her prior life, now creased and marred with the perspiration of futile interviews. In her bodice pocket, she clutches a fissured daguerreotype of Madame Elise Dupont, the shards indenting her palm like a cue that some anguish merits retention. The fellow lodgers afford her berth, recognizing the dazed mien of one whose plunge from favor transpired too swiftly for cognition. But what they overlook is the burgeoning blaze in her eyes, the resolve accruing nightly as she intones her mother's enigmatic final words like a litany, "Remember the documents in my bureau." The drizzle commencing on banishment day shadows Sophie through Marseille's avenues like a personal malediction, drenching her espadrilles and transmuting her employment quest into daily ablution of abasement. She queues outside ateliers at Aurora, her delicate palms betraying her sheltered history to overseers seeing "bourgeois lass" inscribed invisibly. "Ever wielded a loom, mademoiselle?" they query, and Sophie's pause forfeits position after position. The paradox stings profoundly. She's successor to vineyards yielding half Provence's crew, yet can't secure toil-harvesting olives for pittance. Her abdomen rumbles in hunger's cadence as she bypasses bistros where she once dined with her mother, past boutiques where attendants once addressed her nominally but now gaze through her like vapor. The metropolis that fostered her has turned alien, and Sophie learns poverty's acrid verity. It's imperceptible until it befalls you. Each rebuff erodes the assured young woman who'd graced that conservatory dais months prior. Yet something tenacious in her nucleus declines utter fracture. The café garb chafes like emery against skin acquainted with linen blouses and bespoke skirts, but Sophie knots the cotton smock with a queen's dignity. Bienvenue au café rapide. Votre commande? The terms taste like embers on her tongue, but the stipend, meager as it is, signifies more than currency, the defiance of capitulation. Her comrades are compassionate as fractured souls often are to kin, sharing gauloises and sagas of life's abrupt jabs. During respite, Sophie perches in the alley aft the eatery, still grasping her mother's daguerreotype, striving to unravel her life's enigma. "Documents in my bureau," she reiterates mantra-like. "What documents, mammon? What did you endeavor to convey?" The secured compartment haunts her reveries, a conundrum chest that might hold void or plenitude. But Victor sentinel the chateau like a WM hoarding gold, and Sophie lacks stratagem to approach sufficiently to resolve her mother's terminal enigma. The eves are direst, when the hostel's illuminations extinguish and obscurity becomes a tableau for remorse and fury. Sophie reclines on her slender pallet hearkening mature women sob softly into cushions, battling the ire threatening to devour her like corrosive. She envisions Victor's visage each eyelid closure, not the grieving widower he feigned at the interment, but the frigid marauder who smirked while flinging her chattels to the lane. The perfidy incisions deeper than indigence, deeper than famine, for it stemmed from one she trusted to cherish her post-mother's departure. "He orchestrated the protracted ploy," she murmurs to the blemished vault. 4 years of sham paternity for this instant. The hostel's others harbor their fiends, dependency, derangement, misfortune compounding to calamity. But Sophie's fiend bears a name and domicile, slumbers in satin in her mother's bed, expends her legacy on galas and baubles. The inequity would amuse if not so ruinous. 4 months into her novel existence, Sophie glimpses her reflection in a vitrine and scarcely identifies the gaunt stranger reciprocating. Her mother's elegant cheekbones persist, but all else is sculpted by starvation and insomnia. Her palms, once silken from privilege, now roughened from scouring platters and swabbing tiles. The exquisite timepiece her mother bestowed for her 19th fete sold for a fortnight's sustenance. Another sliver of antiquity forfeited for endurance. She caresses her mother's daguerreotype through her chemise, sensing the keen edges of fractured crystal, and vows to the vacant thoroughfare, "I'll decipher what you meant about those documents, ma'am. I'll unravel this riddle, even if it slays me." The utterance lingers aerial like an oath to the cosmos. And for the premier instance in months, Sophie senses beyond despondency, purpose, perilous and devouring as conflagration.